Hey everyone, welcome back to the Layback podcast. Joining us today is Coach Big Toe on social media. You may also know him by his real name, his government name, Matt Tometz. We got connected actually through the podcast world, which is really cool for me. I had seen some of Matt's stuff on social media, especially on Twitter, and something he was doing speed work with the Northwestern baseball team came across my timeline. I found it super interesting. And then out of nowhere, serendipity or something, Matt reached out about probably my least favorite episode, but I guess it rung true to him. It was my solo podcast. I think it was episode 17. He just liked hearing about the entrepreneurial journey. And shout out to him for reaching out. That meant a ton to me. And from there, we've just been going back and forth a good bit. And I had to return the favor, get Matt on the podcast. So we're really excited to have the conversation with him about the performance space. And as you guys know, I hate butchering bios, so I'd rather just have the guests do it. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Matt to run through a little bit of his life's journey.
Fantastic. What a genuine intro. And I don't know about exposing my government name right off the bat, but I guess I'll let it slide. So yeah, Coach Big Toe, probably that guy that posts a little bit too much on literally all of the social media channels. But no, I appreciated so I came across the Flex Pro grip with some consulting I'm doing with someone else. And then I subscribed to the newsletter, and then I saw, oh, he's going to talk about how the company was built. And I was like, sweet. So consequently, my favorite episode. And then I got you on the pod and kind of here we are now. So I'm excited to be a guest, as you're excited to be a guest on mine, because once you host, you know what it's like. But I'll give a little kind of past, present, and future about myself, and then we'll get into it. I won't start with T-ball. I've had some guests do that. But so I'm from the Chicago burbs, about 20 minutes north. I walked on and played college baseball at Truman State. Just don't ask what I topped out at. But I went from walking on to having a nice little 4-year career, learned the value of performance training and off the field stuff. I did an internship 2 summers at a facility back home. Got my master's at TCU. That's where I stumbled into applied sports science. Super grateful for that. Got my thesis published in JSCR. COVID ruined my big plans, kind of like most people. Came back to the burbs, coached at that facility for 3 years. Super grateful for the speed development, the sprinting to be our sports science coordinator as well. Finagled my way through maximizing that experience into Power 5 baseball. Really enjoyed this past year, learned a lot, did a lot of cool things, a lot of stories I couldn't even make up if I tried. And now I'm currently doing my own thing. You know, we can call it Tometz Performance Solutions LLC. I guess I have two government names now. But just in enjoying providing value in different ways to a lot more people and pursuing kind of the things that I'm interested in. So I'm here to help athletes and coaches take control of their sports story. If I had to summarize it up, like I don't really reference stats of mine, but I love the story that I have from playing. And as a coach, I summarize it all by bullet points, not by stats, you know? So sports story is kind of the language in which I describe all of these things. So how cool that we can work backwards from like, well, what story do you want to tell? And then what do we do to make that happen from now until telling that story? So anything with sports science, coaching, athletes, baseball, not baseball, sprinting, anything like that, kind of here we are now.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate you running through a brief life's journey with us. And I'm excited to hear your perspective on our world with the Layback podcast, because as you know, it is mostly elbow health, arm care stuff. We do live in this pretty niche space, but you attacked health and performance for the total athlete in mind, not just a pitcher trying to keep their elbow healthy. But there is a lot of overlap in those worlds. So I'm definitely excited to go down those rabbit holes. But I think we can step back a little bit. You mentioned your sports scientist hat that you put on, as well as the role as a strength and conditioning coach. So, what really sparked that journey for you?
For sure. So I think just performance in general. I was blessed to have some super awesome parents, but not the most athletic. They were great and all, but I don't know if JV tennis plays the bills in my gene pool. So just seeing the value of training and like just off the field stuff, I think is kind of just the foundation, kind of like most people. You know, it's like how the best baseball players don't make the best coaches because it's like, how do you hit a curveball? And they're like, I just see it and hit it versus like someone in the minors who's been grinding and things like that. But I think sports science, so it started at TCU where it was a fully paid GA opportunity. The professor that I had worked super hard for, and he was my internship advisor, knew that I was a good kid, good student, very hardworking. So he put me up for this assistantship. And I was in the sports science center and I was like, oh, cool. It's like sports and sports science. And that wasn't really a thing. Like just performance has progressed so much in the last I graduated undergrad in 2018. I didn't throw a fly ball till 2017, 2018. So I did my GA 2018, 2019, 2020. So sports science has come so far in the last 5, 8 years. And I actually almost left TCU because I was just in a basement reading research on bar speed and cluster sets and all that stuff. And talk about serendipity, I remember emailing my mentor, like, what do I do? Do I come home? What do I tell my parents? Do I get a job now? I can't do this though. And that next week, my boss at TCU goes, you played college baseball, right? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, do you want to work with the baseball team here? And I was like, TCU baseball, Zach Dagan. Like, I used to watch all of those videos, the like win this pitch, the yearly like kind of hype video.
The grind.
And then I
2012,
was
the grind.
exactly, those videos were epic. So fast forward that Monday, 6 a.m., I'm like, I've seen this weight room before, like in these YouTube videos. So I was like, wait, I can collect numbers and actually be there live and you can apply it and kind of do this loop of like collect, what does it mean, apply, rinse, repeat. And then I got in with the beach volleyball team and I was literally in the sand every day. I was traveling with them. Something about travel makes you reflect. I'm just like, I'm flying to Florida right now, all expenses paid for to like cheer on these players, collect their heart rate data, and then talk about it on Monday. Like, how sick is this?
Hmm.
So I think what got me into sports science was the applied piece, but then also learning the objectivity of the scientific method. It's very simple. You collect your data, just like a research study, introduction, methods, results, discussion. Oh, and then data, I guess. Data, results, discussion, rinse, repeat, right? But of course, like there's a reason why sports scientists are in business because you need people to kind of bring it all together. So it's a combination of math. Like, how can a field of math and science be so gray? So I think to be actually applied and doing it, interacting with the athletes and not being stuck behind a screen, but then having this objectivity of like, all right, well, how do I collect more reliable data? How do I just make my processes the scientific method? How do I actually do that? But then you still have to talk to coaches. You still have to talk to athletes. You still have to kind of read between the lines and put it all together. So a combination of having to work hard as an athlete and then just enjoying being with athletes live is kind of what has brought me into the field of kind of sport and performance science.
Awesome. Really getting in the weeds early on because it's stuff that I want to talk about. You've been in the trenches with these athletes. I want to know what you think gets overprogrammed and what is just left alone. What are we not doing enough of as an industry?
Mhm. So I'll start with kind of speed and sprint training, as that's a majority of my background. Sorry, no, I'll talk baseball stuff because we're here for a baseball pod. And we'll just maybe clip that out, maybe not. I'm a human. So I think what gets overprogrammed is those crazy sport-specific exercises. So for example, when they like show an exercise in a weight room and then they like cut the clip and then it shows them in the field and it's just like if you just replace the med ball with a bat, it's the exact same thing. I think that gets so overprogrammed, and I'll tie this into general kind of speed training as well. So I didn't completely lie earlier. So when things get so like sports specific, that lies in the medium, and the medium is not where performance happens. So if we take a step back and ask like, well, what actually causes gains and what are we pursuing? And that's intensity. So Charlie Francis, super famous speed coach, he basically has his 3 zones of intensity: high intensity, 95+% of your best sprint speed. You have medium, which is like 75 to 95, and then you have 75 and below. So high intensity, fast, going to challenge your nervous system, cause gains. Medium is like fast enough. It causes a lot of fatigue, but it's just like that awkward, like a lot of sport practice, a lot of conditioning. It's like fast enough to cause fatigue, but not fast enough to cause gains. And then you have below 75%, which is more active recovery, kind of more just like general blood flow, things like that. So it's not going to cause fatigue, but you're still working, but obviously not fast enough to cause gains. When exercises are so specific that they need a high level of intensity, but it's trying to put sport in the weight room or sport in training, then it's kind of like you're trying to do both of these things really well, but then consequently you do both of them maybe at like 75% of what it could be. So I get the idea of transfer, and I get the idea of it has to come back to the sport. But it's like if we can take a step back and say, I need all intensity, and I'm trying to work on the underlying skills and principles that are going to support their sport, right? So obviously you have to chuck med balls, but can I make it a little bit more general? Work on the general skill of rotation and get all out intensity versus it being so similar to a swing that they're like thinking about all of their coaching cues from the hitting coach and all these things to where it puts us in that medium intense hard-ish zone. It's got to be hard enough to where it's stimulating enough, or it's got to be simple enough and general enough. So I think people get caught in that middle too much in not knowing if they're going for the general underlying qualities of training or if they're going for like on the field sport specific. So I think those drills that look nice on social media just don't really, not that they don't have a place. I just think you're trying to do too many things well. And I think that those are over programmed.
That's some good insight, especially in the role that you were serving while you were at Northwestern. You are dealing with, I don't know what they're called now, but for the longest time they were called accountable hours. The
Hmm.
guys only have 20 hours a week of supervision, whether it's on-field coaching or it's with you doing speed work down the line or in the weight room. So if you are wasting time doing low intensity or not max effort repetitions, it doesn't have to be max weight, but not max intensity, you're probably dropping the ball in some areas. There's just not as much bang for the buck. I remember having that conversation with my strength coach at Dayton. I asked him why we didn't do certain things and why he programs these bilateral exercises because I was already getting into the industry a little bit during my grad years and I could read a sheet of paper and say like, oh, well, unilateral training is more beneficial for what we need in the baseball world. And I had the conversation with him like, why aren't we doing more reverse lunges? Why are we focused on squatting or doing these kind of like hang clean progressions? And his answer was, I am fighting a clock more than anything else. I need to make sure that in the team setting, our training is good enough, but I also don't take away from what you're doing on the field. So now if we do unilateral exercises, just double the time for every single thing. Because if you have to do 3 reps on your left side, you also have to do 3 reps on your right side. So it's just double the total work. And I'm sure that's something that you had to fight constantly. What is ideal versus what is good enough? And what's kind of the Goldilocks zone?
Hmm. Yeah, I think everything is trade-offs. Obviously, if things exist in a vacuum, or let's say you're a professional athlete and this is literally what you're supposed to do all day, every day, and you're already so high level at a lot of things to where you can get a little bit more niche and specific. So if we like exercises and specifics are just ways to deliver principles. So if we're principled in our approach, then we can mix the specifics to match the circumstances and situation, right? If I know I'm going for, again, general lower body strength development, well, I know I need intensity and I know I need sufficient volume, not the most volume in the world. And let's say it's an in-season lift to where I'm just in general not doing as much stuff. Well, then maybe I could program unilateral because I know I have a little bit more buffer room. But when it's like off season, it's road to Omaha, or for the better athletes, D2 road to Cary, obviously. And the coach wants it grinding and no one walking around and everyone's sweating and all these things. It's like, well, then maybe he does want that feel and flow to the lift where you have to also appease the people who are in the process as well. That's one of the cons. As every field has pros and cons of like there's so many people involved and it has to look and feel a certain way and things like that. Versus if you're doing one-on-one with an athlete where it's about giving them what they want and you can have that conversation versus talking to all 35 of my baseball guys, plus all 4 baseball coaches, plus the 6 other coworkers that I had, plus the support staff and all these things of like, no, I actually have a rhyme and a reason. I just can't do 50 one-on-one meetings. So it's definitely a balancing act, but again, it's like a back squat or a reverse lunge aren't wrong. As long as you're getting your intensity, as long as there's progressive overload and things like that, but just mix and match into the circumstances that you have, whether it's 20 hours or whether it's only 45 minutes or practice went over by 15, which never happens in college sports, to where the lift got cut short and things like that. So as long as you're sound in your principles and your why, and it sounds like your coach at Dayton, shout out to him for not only having his reasons, but then having the ability to have a conversation. Just apply your principles through specifics and match your specifics to your situation.
Yeah, that's perfect. I really like the way you ran through that. And now, sticking in this performance world, I know a big passion of yours is sprinting,
Mhm.
is speed mechanics, also just max intensity sprinting. And I'm probably going to butcher some language here because it's not something I'm as well versed in. But I want to apply sprinting to the pitching world. Obviously, max intensity effort in anything, you will get some sort of adaptation stimulus. I want to know why sprinting is good for pitchers. When do you program it? How does it impact them? And what maybe benefits should they expect to see?
Mm. Well, this is probably my hottest take of the pod that we can clip for social media, but it's that pitchers are athletes. Again, to say I'm here to prepare general athletes, right? I'm here to get them ready, their body ready for all the demands that they could experience on the field in their sport and training. So consequently, they can do sport more and sport better. First, if we address sprinting, and sprinting, well, let's take a step back and define speed training. And this was a big light bulb of a lot of our staff development at TC Boost, where it's like we say we do speed training, but it's like, what does that even mean besides just like we train to get faster? So it's the development of sprint mechanics to maximize force vectors, which sounds fancy, but just you got to hit the ground better and harder because vectors have a magnitude and a direction. So the development of sprint mechanics to maximize force vectors across starting, acceleration, and top speed. So those are the three types of at least linear speed that lead to significant and measurable improvements in speed. So if everything comes back to sprinting better, hitting the ground harder and better, and then across all of the different types of speed, we can touch change of direction in there that actually helps us get faster objectively. Knowing that all of those things can benefit the pitchers. So it's all fun and games to like have pitchers not sprint and to say, oh, they're not athletic, they'll just hurt themselves. But it might matter when they're late covering a bag on a ground ball to the first baseman, right? Or they have to run behind home plate and back up on a throw home from the outfield. So although they are pitchers and that is what they do, to act like they don't have to run for their active recovery or they don't have to warm up every day or they have to do PFPs and all of those things, I think does more disservice than service to athletes. But at least kind of how I fit sprint work in with my baseball team this past year was just microdosed at the end of a warm up. So it's like you're going to warm up every day anyways. And if you're just following a principled approach to warming someone up, well, you have your general movement, increased blood flow, core temperature, things like that. You're going to have your kind of middle specific, a little bit more intense things like jumping, plyometrics, sprint mechanics to kind of bridge the gap to the all out stuff, whether it's sprints, all out jumps. And it's similar to throwing, right? We do the same thing with throwing. You have your general J bands, increased blood flow, things like that. Then you have your plyo balls that kind of like middle in between, intense but specific, but not all out. And then you have obviously your throwing. Well, then why don't we do that to the whole body? And sprinting is a great way to do that, where it's all out, it's athletic, cross crawl coordination. It's the fastest thing that the human body can do for the whole body. Obviously like internal rotation and throwing is like however many thousand degrees a second, which you could probably spit out that number. But so if it's going to make us more athletic, also protect our hamstrings, as pulled hamstrings is one of the more common baseball injuries, unfortunately. It's like, well, then why would we not? So it's like we're already a majority of the way there with just a decent warm up. And honestly, it was only 2 to 4 reps of all out sprinting that I did per day with my guys. which is probably, I think you referenced that article, how I just microdosed our in-season speed training, which I actually really liked how that worked out last year. So I think pitchers are athletes. You have to train them as athletes. There's so many reasons where sprinting does come back, and it doesn't really require that much anyways. So I think that there's only benefits, and I'll just mic drop and say pitchers are athletes. So take that.
You brought up mechanics of sprinting,
Yes.
and I've been around baseball programs as a coach where a strength coach spent time teaching the pitchers sprint mechanics. From my side, I'll throw it out there. I felt like it was a waste of time just because I felt like we were taking away practice time from getting better at their specific skill. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm attacking you if you train pitchers on sprint mechanics, but I would love to know from your position maybe why or why not to go down that route with a pitcher.
Yes. So training sprint mechanic drills. Well, first, if it's if you're principled in your approach, right? So it's like I have 15 minutes to warm us up, and I need something in that middle ground to get them a little bit more coordinated, get their brain engaged and things like that, but I can't sprint with them yet. Well, sprint mechanics or sprint drills make a lot of sense. Second, to make more athletic pitchers, so to have the rhythm of a double A switch skip, which is a little bit harder than it sounds. Doing kind of like an asymmetrical type drill or bounding is very hard. Bounding with your hands on your hips, bounding with your hands on your shoulders. So I think even if it's not addressing sprint mechanics itself, I think it makes a lot of sense in a warm up to make them more athletic, to develop their general coordination and things like that. But also taking a step back and saying, I don't have to spend an excessive amount of time. I don't have to break my clipboard over my knee if they do it wrong, because I'm not here to make world-class sprinters. Not everyone is going to look like Usain Bolt. But it's like if it can move the needle in our warm-up, which is why I'm doing it, if it can move the needle in making them more athletic and more coordinated, and ipso facto, it might help them run a little bit better, which will make their sprinting more effective and also keep them healthier because you're putting the right forces in the right places at the right times. I think it's worth a squeeze, but again, it's because I'm only applying it with that lens of like all of those other things, but improving the mechanics itself is like more a side effect.
Right. I like that you brought up the overall athleticism piece as well as coordination. If anything can be related back to those two fields to me, I can generally be comfortable with it because ultimately pitchers are going to struggle to repeat anything they do coming down a slope. So if we put them in positions in training to be able to solve more problems or feel new positions or have to work through new challenges, generally they're going to be able to make better adjustments with the specific skill we care most about, which is getting on the mound, throwing cheese, and throwing it to a specific location.
Mhm.
So, as far as the responses I've gotten for why train mechanics of sprint mechanics for a pitcher, that's the best I've heard yet. I still have nightmares seeing pitchers on the ground doing arm
Oh
swings,
no, so bad.
but yeah,
I don't
but
do that with actual
the way
sprinters.
you broke it down into bounding, switches, different things like that, those are all extremely athletic tasks that require one, a good bit of focus, but two, they are going to make you work freaking hard and have to control your body throughout space at a high speed. And ultimately, although it's with a ball in your hand, that's very similar to the goal of pitching.
Mhm. Yeah, so I'm glad that you got some light bulbs on that. And again, it's like let's list all of the benefits or all of the reasons that one could apply sprint mechanic drills. And well, the one that actually improves the mechanics is probably going to take a little bit more time, a little bit more total reps, a little bit more coaching emphasis and things like that. Well, also that's probably going to piss off the baseball coach. So it's like, all right, well, that's not why I'm applying it, and that's not going to be engaging for the guys. It's not going to be engaging for the coaches. So I'm going to take a step back and say, well, it's not going to look perfect, but that's not the reason why I'm doing it. That's like I said, more of a byproduct. So it was great being like, oh, coach, these drills are actually like really hard. I was like, yeah, you looked so bad on that. But then to say like, dude, how are you supposed to in the bottom of the ninth, full count, 2 outs, super fatigued, have control of throwing this pitch when you can't do it fresh? And I'm just asking you to jump one leg to the other leg with a double arm swing, where it's like you don't have to be that precise at all. You just have to get the just the movements timed up together. So again, it's the principles that I'm just applying through sprint drills when I'm already going to have a chunk of time anyways. And it's no more than 4 by 10 yards, 6 by 10 yards at most of just like 2 or 3 sprint mechanic drills, and then you move on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you going through that, like I said. Now, maybe you already hit on it saying sprinting, but offline, I mentioned to you, I wanted you to think about when you write a program for a baseball team, what are program essentials?
Hmm.
So I'd love if you could walk us through what goes through your programming brain. What is a must when you are truly programming for a full team, not just an individual player?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to reflect back now that I've had to put my thoughts and ideas into principles in a team setting. And not that I didn't work with teams in the private side, it was just 12 was like a lot for us. So to be efficient and effective within the hours, within the constraints of like, oh, now we got to take out 10 minutes because practice went late or whatever it could have been, that consequently, a lot of this stuff that I'm a huge Mike Israetel guy, if you know who that is, RP Strength. He's in the like kind of bodybuilding space. But again, it's principles of lifting for strength and hypertrophy, right? So I think consequently, knowing what bodybuilders are going after, knowing that I'm not going after those things and how do they achieve those things, well, then I got to do kind of the opposite. So, long story short, I believe in total body lifting. So, even if you're on a 4 day split, although it can emphasize upper lower, it's still going to be total body lifting because, I'm the first to take a step back and say to get better at baseball, you got to play baseball. For me to act like the lifting and the sprinting is the end all be all. Yeah, there's points in the season, basically off season, where that can be a little bit more of an emphasis. But if my guys can't throw their flat ground, or if the hitters can't run around the bases because their legs are so sore, well, then what's the point? So total body lifting, even though you do a little bit less per day, so you're doing 3 to 4 total body lifts a week, in the whole week, you're still getting a lot of super high quality work, and the total volume is the same. So basically, if I spread out my stress over every training day, similar to the sprinting, where I'm only doing 2 to 4 all out efforts. But if I'm doing that 4 to 5 days a week, well, then I'm getting what 5 times 2 is 10 and 5 times 4 is 20. I'm getting 10 to 20 super high quality sprint efforts versus dividing that up into 2 days only. So I think the biggest foundation is total body programming because it lets us get high quality work in, but doesn't take away from the baseball itself, or at least I'm trying to not let it take away from the baseball, aka kind of soreness. Or if you pull too much out of one bucket, let's say upper body only, well, you gotta throw every day, right? Or if I pull too much out of the lower body bucket, well, you use your lower body when you run, when you swing, when you throw, and things like that. So I'd say that's probably the first essential. And then, well, what's next, Coach Big Toe? How do you organize your total body programming? Oh, well, I'm glad you asked. So so first we are going to, and yes, I did refer to myself as Coach Big Toe in the third person. So first we're going to start with our explosive stuff. So that's going to be a jump and med ball superset. So plyometric to become more athletic, ankle stiffness for our hitters, and then some sort of med ball throw for our rotation. Then we're going to get into our lower body superset with shoulder care because it's not competing muscle groups and to fatigue your shoulder muscles during a lower lift drill versus like a core muscle plus a lower body lift drill. I think shoulder care just makes a lot of sense in that spot. Then we're going to get into a push pull for upper body. And then our last thing is going to be our accessories. So whether it's another rotation exercise, maybe a little bit more weighted, like a cable or just a plate chop or something like that. Another shoulder care, and another accessory, like maybe a core or a plank or a hip flexor strength for our hitters, or I would make my guys lay on a lax ball for the posterior shoulder. Because again, it's like if I have them here and I can make them do something, I literally programmed in soft tissue work into our lift in the accessory block. So explosive, jump slash med ball, lower body would be lower body and shoulder care, upper body's push pull, and then we get into our accessory, which could be rotation, core, shoulder care, things like that. So total body programming, that's kind of how each day looks ish. And again, if it's our upper body focused day, well, then maybe I'll put the push pull first, and then I'll just make the leg maybe only 2 sets. So it's like I'm still getting good stimulus, but that's two sets of legs that I don't have to add on the leg day. So I'm going to be a little bit less sore. So I'll stop there before I continue. Obviously, I have more stuff, of course. But kind of how does that first kind of foundation sound?
No, I like that. I like the way you're approaching it. I think talking about the full body approach is unique for me because most of my strength work before starting FlexPro Grip was on the private side. So I was able to really dive into specifics doing upper lower splits. There was a few times I maybe fooled around with doing like a push pull, upper body push on a lower body pull, and then flip flop the next day after that. But that's when I knew I specifically had 4 training days per week with a Wednesday off day, weekend off, and everything was concrete with no variability. That's the world I have always lived in with my strength and performance background. Now, of course, you are living in a very, very different world when it comes to teams at the college level because no matter what, you are lower on the totem pole, whether you like it or not. As you mentioned early on in the interview today, you always have to be considering what the other players, in this instance, I'm referring to players as coaches or administration or different rules, have to say about what's going on in your own programming. So I definitely think it's an interesting way to problem solve where, as you said, or as we discussed earlier, you can kind of find that Goldilocks zone
Mhm.
of making sure you're tapping into a stimulus, but you aren't pushing guys to exhaustion.
Mhm. And knowing what stimulus I'm going after and consequently what gains I'm going after. So especially if it's in season where this stuff means the most, right? Or I'm going to be more intentional about having training not take away from baseball. Well, if I'm going after intensity, right? The speed of a med ball throw, the speed of a squat, or just the weight, but not necessarily the reps, well, then that's what I'm going to go after and I'm going to not mess with getting excessive soreness, excessive just general fatigue and things like that. But it's interesting in the college side. In season, I had auto-regulated working set numbers because to act like I could program for guys that play 27 innings plus extras versus like the freshmen that aren't going to touch the field, it was a really nice way for me to say, hey, you have 2 to 4 working sets. If you don't know how much you want to do, come talk to me. My starting hitters that were super banged up, I said, okay, I'm asking you for 4 total squats today. We're going 2 by 2 front squats, and you got to get under zero point 0.5. All I'm asking you is for 4 squats. So I got a lot of buy-in that way. Again, I'm going after intensity, not the number of reps. And then I got buy-in from the players. And then what would get you more sore? 2 by 2 of heavy front squats or like 4 by 6 of like medium front squats? All those reps
By
is going to,
six, it's
yeah,
just so much volume.
exactly. But then on the flip side, the guys who aren't playing as much, or let's say a guy who is playing but like not that much, so he still wants to get a good workout in, well, he can work up to in total, 4 by 3, something like that instead. But it's funny, the first few weeks of doing that, I went and asked each guy ish over the course of an hour just what their thought process was. And guys were usually more right than wrong. Like the starters usually is like 2 or 3 sets, and the guys who weren't playing it's usually 4. But I asked a pitcher what he was going to do, and he said, I'm not going to wait a Tuesday game, and it was a Monday lift. He goes, I'm not going to play that much. I'll hit the full lift. Long story short, we were getting blown out, and nothing was going well, so he ended up pitching. So instead of him doing 4 sets of a total body lift of everything, imagine if it was 8 sets of upper body only. Where it's like you just never know. And again, in a whole week, I'm still getting a lot of really good stuff in. It's just divided up over kind of more days. So not that a upper lower off upper lower is wrong. And when I do 4 days a week, that's what it looks like ish. It's just maybe like 66% upper and 33% lower, and then kind of just flip flop. So yeah, I think you always have to keep the sport in the back of your mind, and that's just an easy way to do it with like total body stuff, and then with things like letting them pick the amount of working sets and things like that. But because I know my principles of intensity, not volume, and things like that. But then kind of what else I have in here within some of the specific things of how I program my med ball drills, my shoulder care, things like that. So shoulder care, I have 3 main categories. So we have our Ys. So it's going to be our posterior tilt, lower trap stuff, external rotation, obviously, and then shoulder protraction and like upper rotation, basically. And
So
with
more of our
this,
reaching with that,
yeah,
correct?
reach around, rotate, Eric Cressy. And within that, Consequently, I can organize those, what makes more sense, or also what days it doesn't make sense, because that counts as well on when to put those in the program. So in off season, external rotation, rotator cuff, I need that during the week. So our rotator cuff stuff was always on Friday. Protraction, not that hard. To a little bit more specific of a muscle action. That was Monday, and then Y's, a little bit more of the whole shoulder, things like that. That was always on Wednesdays, right? And then literally, well, I guess we didn't do external rotation stuff in season, but basically in season we flipped it. So like for our lower body stuff, it was always our hinges on Friday because I don't need your hammies cooked on a Monday. Then you have to make it through 5 days of practice, right? But then in season, our hinges were on day one because I want to get your hammies just addressed as far away as possible from our important thing basically on the weekend. So off season, weekends don't matter. In season, weekends matter. So that's kind of how I did my shoulder care. There's also total body stuff. So this would be more in that last accessory block, but we got to take care of the hips and T-spine. And then med ball throws, we have our overhead throw. So that would be just for general kind of lat explosiveness. We have our single arm shot put, a little bit more like throwing. Then we have our scoop throw, two hands, underhand, kind of like hitting, a little bit heavier. So then figuring out what my categories are of all of these things, again, lower body development. You have unilateral, bilateral, squat, and hinge. Push. You have unilateral, bilateral, horizontal, and vertical push. And then same for pull. And it's like, well, what makes more sense or less sense on certain days? Like all of our vertical pushing and pulling was on day 3 off season, Friday. Because again, I'm not going to cook their lats specifically in the beginning of the week and things like that. So that's just a little bit more details about how that total body program comes to life. And then it almost writes itself. I call it a skeleton. So if I know what type of exercise I'm doing each day, and I know what day or not I want certain things, well, then you kind of write out your whole program, and then you just have to put in specific exercises. Say, hey, this is my favorite first shoulder protraction drill, and this is the hardest one that I want to get to, hopefully. And then what's a drill or two that I can kind of meet in the middle? And then you just write out your 3 to 4 phase progressions of everything. And I got a lot of success programming my stuff that way.
Okay. So one thing I want to address from that is I like how you explain the total body system that you've put in place kind of as a natural checks and balances.
Exactly.
Yeah, which I thought was a cool way to look at it. I hadn't approached it from that mindset before. I liked it. Now I want to shift into mixing in some individualization.
Mm.
I think that's been such a popular word over the past 5 years in the baseball landscape, really just sports in general. But everybody is chasing quote unquote individualization in their programming to address a specific need that they have. Now that gets more difficult in a team setting. So I'm curious now how you can mix in specific needs for an individual. You began to address it earlier with the reps and sets that you might change based on the total workload that an athlete might experience in a week. Do you also do similar things with exercise selection?
Yeah, so I'll make the audience roll their eyes really quick. And yes, it comes back to principles. But I'll give 2 examples first, and then I'll kind of go from there. So 2 things that I found a lot of success in, not only with the auto-regulated kind of, or not auto, the self-regulated working set number, was with our med ball weights. So, if we're all doing a single arm shot and I like load velocity profile, just have them do a 2-4-6 and see how their weight drops off, how much or how little it drops off. Well, then I would just write on their sheet after doing all that testing, 2-4-6, depending on kind of their profile, kind of what they need or what they're not as good at. So we're all doing the same drill. I don't have to coach 3 different exercises, but they're each getting a little bit different stimulus or a little bit different, in this case, intensity, because they're all doing the same volume. So just changing the weights is a super easy way. And then especially when we got into postseason, so kind of like May, June, when the season was done, I'd spent a whole year with these guys. I knew who was strong, weak. I knew what our force plates looked like. Well, we can all back squat. And the guys that are in the development program, 4x5, I don't care about your VBT. Just get within like 1 to 2 reps from failure. And then I got my more strength development guys. Hey, we're going to go, 4x3, and you got to be under 0.55, 0.6 for at least 2 of your 3 reps per set. So they're getting their strength working. And the guys who are strong enough in the power bucket, max power near, we'll just say zero point 0.7, 75, 70% max, something like that. We'll say zero point 0.7. Well, then you guys are back squatting 4x2 at, zero point 0.7 to kind of this 0.8-ish max power range. Again, we're all doing the same drills. I just had to print out 3 different programs with just different reps and speeds. And basically, bar speed just means weight, more or less. So within the same exercise, you can change up the weight, the speed, or basically the intensity. So that worked really well for us. But then in regards to specific exercises, so again, coming from the private side, I'm a little bit more okay with chaos and a little bit more maybe creative than someone who's been in college basically since they were like 20. So for example, just thinking about with our force plates, I would look at their concentric to eccentric force ratios. They can jump the same height, but do it in different ways. I could have someone who's a little bit more plyometric, and I want them on more of a strength dominant jump exercise. Well, I can have them do a seated med ball jump. So they're bear hugging a med ball, sit on a box, and then jump. A little bit more concentric biased, a little bit more strength biased if they're a little bit more of a plyometric jumper. But then if someone's a little bit more of a strength jumper, they're a little bit more eccentric in kind of their ratios. Well, I can have them go off a box into like a hurdle jump or two. So I have to set up one box, say, hey, the left side of the box is for your seated med ball squat jumps. And then the right side of the box is for our like plyo repeat hurdle jumps. So even with one piece of equipment, I can still get multiple uses out of it. This was a realization also I had because what are the principles? Well, I have to be efficient, effective. I only have this much time. At one point, I was going to program, well, if your Z-score is below -1, you have this exercise. If your Z-score is between -1 and 1, you have this exercise. And if your Z-score is above 1, I'm like, I'm not doing 3 things. I'm just going to do above 0 and below 0. And that is good enough because even if I change that one exercise, that's maybe 50% as effective as it could be, having 2 buckets instead of 3, well, that's still getting me better than 0 individualization at all. So I think it's like it's a give and a take, obviously. So it's like, how much are you willing to coach? How much chaos are you willing to have? How much do you trust your guys? But if I know that what causes the gains that I want is intensity, you can change the intensity with the weight of stuff and with the speed of stuff. And then fortunately, if you have technology, that makes it a little bit easier. But I think that's how you can keep it easier for everyone, but not cookie cutter because you are changing things. You are individualizing things, but they're all doing the same program.
I like that a lot. I thought that was explained very concisely in a way that hopefully the audience can understand. And now I want to talk about the communication aspect that you have to have in this team setting with the other individuals. We talk about the niche audience that we have listening. A lot of these guys are returning from some sort of injury or something nagging, something like that. So now in this individualization piece, you have guys that are limited in some capacity. Maybe they can't put both hands on a bar for a back squat because of tightness in the elbow or lack of range of motion in the shoulder. So what are other adjustments or communications that you'll make to ensure that a rehabbing guy can still be a part of the team?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think communication, if we take a step back and talk just coaching in general, I think everything comes back to expectations. And it's one thing to assume, oh, I know that a guy is going to reach out to me if an exercise doesn't agree with him, or if he's not feeling it, or maybe doesn't think he's doing right, that he's going to come talk to me and tell me these things, versus just being intentional enough to plan out your little pre-lift speech, right? I had so many sticky notes of just like 3 to 4 things that I just wanted to say, that I just thought of over the course of the week or that morning or whatever it is. Because it's one thing to say like, hey, bro, why didn't you tell me? And they go, well, I didn't know I was supposed to. Versus earlier this week, I literally had this conversation. I had this sticky note on my desk of when I said, come talk to me, right? So expectations, aka accountability, you have to hold them to something. Well, you can't hold them to something if it's not there. So I think even as simple as it is, you can't, if there's anything working with college boys has taught me is you can't assume that they know anything or that they will be reliable. They'll work really hard. Reliable, maybe not so much. So I think I don't really care about like exercises and specifics are just ways to deliver principles. So if a guy has a safety squat bar because he's got a cranky elbow or shoulder, well, as long as he's hitting the right number of reps and the right speed, well, the quads don't know if it's a safety squat bar, if it's a back squat. With that being said, when guys were asking for variations, again, the last thing I'm going to do is say, sorry, coach, he needed a back squat. Sorry, his elbow's a little cranky. But on the flip side, instead of saying, hey, have you seen Kristen, our athletic, shout out Kristen, she's great. Hey, have you seen Kristen yet? I would say, oh, what has Kristen said about this? Assuming that if we're going to modify the lift for you, that you have talked to the athletic trainer, and as long as we're on the same page, I don't really care because I need you to baseball, and there's always creative ways to get what I really care about, and that's the principles, that's the intensity, that's things like that. So as long as you set the expectations and the groundwork of getting everyone involved, including the athletic trainer, that they're going to communicate these things, and that where it's like, let's say that they have to front squat, and that's a little bit harder than a back squat, just like holding it more anterior core, things like that. It's like, I'm still expecting you to make this happen, but we're making this change because it's for you. But here's my non-negotiables. My non-negotiables aren't the exercise. My non-negotiables are the weight, the speed, and talking to me and the athletic trainer.
The communication loop is a powerful thing. Just
Mhm.
if you get everyone involved. I had a Twitter exchange with a few people the other day
Oh man,
that don't worry, it all turned out well, but it was right up this alley. I don't know if players realize all the time that everybody involved in their career, for the most part, wants the best for the individual. So
crazy.
they might get a little frustrated, the people in power I'm speaking to might get a little frustrated if it isn't exactly what they had programmed from the beginning or they had written out or planned, but they are willing to make concessions or make changes for the health and success of the athlete at all times. Because at the end of the day, we wouldn't be in these positions if it wasn't for the athletes, anyways.
Yeah, I think just to even just say it like that, like, do you think I'm doing this for your detriment? Do you think I'm not considering all of the things and similar to bring it full circle, like when you asked your strength coach, why don't we go unilateral? Well, if the strength coach was like, well, if it's unilateral, it's more reps, it's more time with the bar on your body, it's going to be a little bit deeper range of motion and all these things, and that's probably going to get you more sore. And I know that we have like the Fall World Series coming up in 2 weeks. So I'm not going to add in a new exercise and all these things. It's like, oh, geez, thank you for not programming that. So I think also just saying like, hey guys, like I'm here for you, and I probably like explaining these things a little bit more than I should, and I'd be happy to explain anything and everything about this program because first, it's going to get a little bit of buy-in. Second, it's going to teach you a little bit more about the training process. So when you're at home over winter break, when you're at home over the summer, hopefully you can make one or two better decisions on your own. Then, if the pitching coach comes after you or if Kristen is confused, then like you can also be an advocate for yourself and get us all on the same page. So I think not necessarily mansplaining just for the sake of mansplaining, but saying like, hey, we have to get on the same page. And if part of that is the athlete education piece of all of this, like, do you think I'm trying to hurt you? And like if they look you dead in your face and say yes, to be like, all right, I think you have some problems, or I'm not doing a good job myself explaining, being able to take some onus on my own being. So I think it all comes back to expectations. And then the specifics, again, are principles. How do I still get good training and how do I not take away from baseball?
Perfect. Thank you. And then now maybe for a fun one here. I got really excited about this when I thought of it as a question beforehand. Hopefully we can get into the weeds. You can only choose one. Make strengths stronger or improve weaknesses. And I want to know why. Then we can address both sides after and what an all-encompassing program will be. But the reason I'm even asking this, but I'm buying you time right now so you can think about it. But the reason I'm even asking this is I feel like there's been more conversations lately about putting athletes in buckets and supporting what those athletes already do well instead of addressing maybe some underlying issues. To me, I don't know if I fall into that realm just because of what we know about the elbow. If this is the weakest link, it's going to go no matter what, no matter how strong everything else is. So I struggle just stating my case up front to say to make the strength stronger. I tend to lean towards the all encompassing. I would rather have no weaknesses, but maybe not this one absolute unbelievable strength, rather than just being superhuman in like two areas. Now I bought you time. Go ahead.
Fantastic. And when you said you were excited for this question, I was like, I swear to God, if this is the strength versus weaknesses question, and this is the question that I like skipped on my first go around of typing up my notes. And it definitely took me some time, but I think if I had to pick one and not just say it depends, which is always the right answer,
Always.
but not good content for social media or podcast, I would say improve weaknesses, similar to what you just said, where it's my role as a performance coach is to make the most well-rounded athlete, robust athlete, to put them up in the best position to sport more and sport better. And that lets them develop those things that they need in their sport. So whether it's developing general, like our pitcher is going to sprint that much, no. But if it's going to make their lower body more robust to handle better forces, better coordination, all these underlying things, right? If I work on core strength through all three planes, right? Frontal, sagittal, and transverse. Well, although rotation is just, well, there's some like side bend and things like that, but we'll just say just transverse. Well, all those things are just going to complement and support what they're doing when they're swinging, even though it might not be a direct one-to-one kind of connection. So I think in my role, I think improving weaknesses makes a little bit more sense. And then I guess I'll tie this into the now break down both sides. So the idea of improving strengths or leaning into strengths, well, athletes are elite compensators and no one does anything like right or perfect. Like just watch like the 100-meter dash. Like there's 8 different running forms for the top 8 sprinters in the world, right? And you have guys like Kershaw, who's a little bit more over the top, to knuckle drag nation submarine guys, to like sidewinders like Chris Sale. Like there's so many ways to throw a ball over a plate that's hard for hitters to hit. They compensate and they do what their body is made for and things like that. That's where improving strengths makes sense. But I guess I'll kind of bounce back and forth. Improving weaknesses isn't going to hurt. It's only just going to kind of raise everything up-ish, maybe level some things out. But if you lean into strengths too much, it could hurt. So it's kind of like, do I not get hurt or do I just improve performance? And it's like, in my lens, again, because I'm trying to help them sport more and sport better, that's where I think improving weaknesses makes more sense. But I think also that emphasis can change based on the time of year. So now I guess I'll say it depends. So if we go back to the, what type of jumper are they? A little bit more plyometric or a little bit more kind of strength dominant? Well, I can give them the jump exercise they suck at in the off season and give them one that they're good at in season. And similar to like if someone absolutely loves 2-pound med balls and the sixes they just absolutely suck, well then again, I'm going to give them what they suck at in the off season and lean into their strengths, help them feel good, and what's going to help their performance in season, maybe the lighter 2-pound med balls. So yeah, those are my general thoughts, and definitely took me a minute to think of, but I think I landed that plane pretty okay.
Yeah, I'll take it. Like I said, I have seen that more and more, and I'm constantly scratching my head on it. I gave my 2 cents, but I would say that's probably because I bias more towards the injury prevention side than overall peak performance. I think in your breakdown, I started to when you were moving your hands around, thank you for being a hand talker.
I'm
I
Italian.
it helped me think about, do I want to push my ceiling up or do I want to raise my floor? And generally, I live in the raise the floor world. I would rather my floor just be overall higher than have this large performance gap. And when I think of accentuating strengths, I just think of a larger gap. And the danger to me when I see this larger gap is it's the same thing when we're on ramping guys in throwing programs. If the dude is throwing 84 miles per hour in his bullpens, but he goes out and he's consistently topping at 91 in a game and ranging 87 to 91, he is not prepared for that 91 in the least. And maybe he's dominant when he throws the 91, but I'm constantly getting scared that his body is not prepared to handle that stress. And I would hate to be in a position then programming wise where I'm exacerbating that risk. That to me is just not something I can live with. I'm not saying it is inherently wrong or bad because, like you said, there are times for it when we need an athlete to feel good because what matters most in season is winning the game and competing for a national championship. Those are the reasons athletes play sports. It's not just for an overall all-encompassing great experience with a well-rounded program. They want to go out, they want to wear their team colors, and they want to freaking dominate.
And then being able to be a coach and explain those things when it's like college off season, September, October, November, it's drills that are awkward, ones that they're not good at. Hey, I just want to chuck a 2 pound med ball. Hey, we'll get there. Trust me. I'm trying to build your body up as best as I can. So consequently, you can ball out in a few months. So it's not even like weaknesses or strengths. It's like how do you describe those things and get that buy-in? If we take another step back to make everyone roll their eyes again, I think, yeah, do I just make the ceiling higher or do I raise the floor higher? So in a performance aspect, I think raising the floor up gives them a better platform to sport more, sport better, and kind of do all those other things.
And now sticking kind of on this injury topic, I know on a previous discussion, you talked about your arm farm epiphany. At least that's how I wrote it down, how I'm remembering it. So I'd love to just open the floodgates for you to talk about your own discovery and how you, I guess, found out that doing curls can be great for baseball players.
Yeah, again, so the world of training and performance training has changed so much in the last however many years we want to say, right? Some arbitrary number between like 4 and 8. And I remember in high school, and I guess I'll blame this for the reason I don't have bigger arms now. But I remember as a pitcher, not doing any arms, basically whatsoever, at least like direct bicep and tricep exercises. Well, then fast forward, I'm watching Trevor Bauer on his YouTube channel, watching him doing eccentric curls with 70s. So it's like, how do we go from that to that? And I'll use an example of Eric Cressy when he kind of changed his stance on the sleeper stretch. Well, one of his biggest realizations was like, what other joint do we get into extreme end range and just jam it? And similar to arm care, in what other joint or muscle tendon kind of junction, if it's bothering us, do we just keep our hands completely off of it? Right? If your patellar tendon is bothering you, jumper's knee, things like that, you're going to hammer your tib raises for below the knee. You're going to handle your isos for your quad and for your patellar tendon. You're going to work on your quad flexibility and all of these things. So it's like, why is the arm and the shoulder and elbow the only joints that like, if it bothers you, you stay away from it? So it's kind of like, what would we do for any other joint? Like if your knee was bothering you, and I was like, whoa, let's just like lay off and just like continue playing basketball and running and doing all these things and just like hope it gets better. So that's kind of the backstory. But the epiphany was doing bis and tris with my pitchers. So whether it was for lifting and it was just doing like 4x4, 4 seconds down, and then just like regular tricep curls for 4 weeks, or it was, and again, that's not, although that is tempo, it's not that much volume. It's not like it's 10 reps of 4 seconds eccentric. And then the next 4 weeks, it would be like, hey, let's get a pump, 3x15 biceps and tricep curls. And there was a reliever, I remember it like it was yesterday. He's like, yeah, coach, it's weird. My arm feels better the more arms I do. And I was like, huh, interesting. And so whether that was like our Monday lift or whether it was like the pitcher's active recovery run the day after throwing, where we do our tempo runs, then we do an iso circuit, lunge, push up, straight leg glute bridge, pike position, half kneeling side plank, and then a partner bicep tricep. So if we're standing, I put my arms out kind of like this, and then you push down for your triceps, I'm pushing up, then you'd flip. So isos, or at least a little bit more volume in a pump. So volume in a pump gets blood flow, which gets good stuff in and bad stuff out. That's one of the main kind of justifications for not really icing stuff anymore. Because ice, although it makes it feel better, it does the exact opposite of what we want for recovery. And I had all anterior shoulder stuff when I used to play. And although icing made it feel better, if I did it on a Saturday, my shoulder was screwed for the Sunday game. So I could only ice my stuff at the end of the weekend. So if it's a little bit higher reps, a little bit more of a pump, it's going to get good stuff in, bad stuff out, and promote just more blood flow, which we need to recover, right? But then if we do isos in that 15 to 30 second range, just doing a hold, and this is something that I'm recently kind of diving into and very interested in. So have you heard of stress shielding
Oh yeah. I
and
mean,
stress relax? Oh
we're
yeah,
talking
sorry.
about Flex Pro Grip right now.
Yeah. All right. So if you're doing a hold, it's going to basically fatigue, let's just say bicep. It's going to fatigue the bicep, so then the bicep tendon has to basically turn on. So stress shielding is where the muscle just takes over, and the stress relaxation is where the muscle gets out of the way. So it's like if, again, principles. Well, I need blood flow and I need to take care of the tendons. One day is going to be for a pump, one day is going to be for our ISOs. So it's like, what other joint do we straight up ignore? And if our principles are sound and you listen to the players and things like that, and maybe there's certain exercises, because I still get elbow tingles to this day, certain bicep exercises just don't agree with me. Well, I'd hope, at least being a mid 20-year-old male and who had lifted himself a lot, I know enough bicep exercises to hopefully find one that agrees with your elbow, right? Yeah, I think that was a big realization for me, and I'm glad I found it.
Yeah, I do love that you brought up the stress shielding and I thought maybe you were just going to unintentionally sell Flex Pro Grip right there. 'Cause that's what we were working on. That's why we do the long holds with Flex Pro Grip there. I'm sure Keith Barr has
Hmm.
influenced a
Yeah,
lot of what
we
you
talked about
do as
him.
well. But yes, Keith Barr, Kubo, the tendon research from around the world has pretty much paved the way for what we're doing with Flex Pro Grip. And yeah, you're 100% right. Both can feel good when it comes to ISOs actually making a physiological change or getting the pump from doing tons of reps, but you're not actually getting any better with the ice or avoiding the issue. And as you said, it was always a head scratcher for me. Why are we avoiding the arm? Why are we scared of the arm? We need to expose the arm to stress if we expect it to be able to handle throwing 95 or swinging a bat. I know we don't talk a lot about hitting on here, but the anterior stress of the shoulder and the chest when we release from a swing, there's a ton of stress on the arm and shoulder with everything we do in baseball. So to think that avoiding it would be the answer to me is just asinine.
Hmm. Was this the part of the show notes where it said in small font shameless plug for Pro Grip? Perfect.
Yeah,
Got it.
you nailed that. I
Yeah.
appreciate it.
But again, it's like what are the principles? Well, if I'm doing 2 by 15 or even 2 by 20, yeah, you're gonna get a little pump. But what bodybuilder is only doing 2 sets? None. You're probably gonna be sore if you hammer 4 by 20, maybe not 2 by 20. So it's like, what principles am I applying and what am I also avoiding? So it's like, oh, well, I'm not lifting for hypertrophy. It's like two sets of anything. It's not going to give you any hypertrophy, but it's going to give you that little pump, that little muscle disruption because obviously it was being worked. But hopefully you can bounce back. If not in a day, you wouldn't even be that sore the next day anyways. So yeah, that was I like the arm farm epiphany. That's a very succinct way to put it.
Yeah, maybe that's a future ebook for you or another one of your YouTube
Hey,
series, just the Arm Farm Epiphany. Why not? It's got a ring to it. At least I think it does.
I
Maybe
will
it's just me
co-write that with
dissecting.
you any day.
Yeah, and I'm in. I think we can get a lot of people to subscribe to that.
Sweet.
That kind of concludes my tougher questioning, at least I think what would be the tougher questioning. And I want you to put your scientist hat back on because I know you are a sports scientist at heart. Is there any research that you have coming down the line that you're willing to share, or maybe projects that you would love to explore in the future?
General topics. Admittedly, I think I should be a little bit better at reading research myself. Now, with that being said, I think being an actual coach makes me a better sports scientist, and being a better sports scientist makes me a better coach, right? So it's like you take the two extremes. So I have a published thesis in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, and I've coached a group of 10-year-olds during quarantine and COVID outside in a field with no equipment but cones, both the two extremes of applied coaching and real world stuff and like lab research where it doesn't exactly apply to the real world. And then I put it all together. Okay, well, from my 10-year-olds, how am I creative? How do I make it happen? How do I get across what I want to get across? How do I be creative in how I'm describing things to get some buy-in? But then how do I make my processes a little bit more repeatable, a little bit more reliable? Well, if I start with what stat tests that I want to run, well, then I know how to organize it and collect it. So it's already organized. So I don't have to doing it after the fact is just a nightmare, just like reorganizing your data and stuff. So I think that there's value in both of those. I don't think I could do as good sports science without coaching and vice versa. Things that I think are interesting, ISOs and tendons in general. I might or might not have a bum Achilles myself, but I think the unique thing about sports is the time constraint, and often that makes most things plyometric, whether it's how fast you have to accelerate the arm or jumping or sprinting or whatever it may be. So I think that that's pretty interesting. Some of my own research, I've either made podcasts about it or basically just sharing data from TC Boost in my old podcasts or my Simply Faster articles or my Patreon. I'm starting to share kind of a little bit more exclusive data, like the eccentric utilization ratio. So your kind of movement jump divided by your squat jump. Like that's a number that we've all probably heard of, but like how many people have you actually seen or heard do it or talk about it? So I go through all the 60 athletes that we did that with at TC Boost, what was good, what's bad, what I learned about it, how you can apply it to things like that. So I'm really excited about how my Patreon is going. But I think the best thing or the best way to go about research is having a real world problem. So I think that's what gravitated me towards your work is you were a real coach. So then you kept seeing guys with arm issue after arm issue after arm issue. You're like, well, I want to do something about it. So instead of just saying, I want to learn more because I train baseball players, it's like, no, a very specific problem. And I want to know how to train for it. And is there even a way? Or my guy, Kyle Salmons with the Arizona Cardinals, he had two guys rupture their Achilles and they had surgery within like a week of each other. So he needed to get them back. And he got them back within like 6 months or 5.5, maybe. So we had a real world problem. And that's how we got super into tendons and ISOs and things like that. So I think you have to coach to have real world problems to give context for your research and stuff. So admittedly, I probably don't read as much research as I should. I am getting better at it. But on the flip side, like if you just read it and then you're like, oh, cool, that made me feel better. Well, kind of what's the point? So I think if every article or every few you said, hey, here's this thing that I'm going to do in my next workout, or here's this thing I'm going to mess with my next athlete's program, then that's how you apply research. So kind of bring it all together to not only coaching, but doing sports science, but then also doing sports science, then it helps your coaching with a few topics that I'm interested in. So I guess I kind of answered your question, at least a little bit.
Yeah, whatever. It's all up to the interviewee's interpretation. That's what's most important. I'm sure there's some files you can't disclose yet because it's about the future performance of our U.S. Olympic track team or something like that.
Oh my gosh, I wish. That'd be super cool. But one I am excited to type up in my Patreon is break down my force plate decision making tree.
Ah, there we go.
And similar to like, well, what type of jumper are they? But then you can apply that, and then I would do this exercise or this one. Well, you can do it with a bunch of different force plate numbers. Well, not a bunch, honestly, only a few that I think matter. But then you tie that in with their lifting, their med ball velos, their upper body strength, pull up strength, all these things. It's like you can write out their whole program individualized and like, and I've shown that graphic maybe to you, but I've shown it to a few other people as well. And actually someone in pro ball right now, and they're like, oh my gosh, like no one's doing this. And I was like, it's basically just like things we all talk about. I just put it in a graphic, but I'll take the credit for sure. So I'm super excited to dive into that. But no, I think, yeah, it's just having done it in the real world. So it's like, oh, that's not realistic. Like I can't make that happen with 35 guys. But then I'll tie in my experience working with 10-year-olds, be like, I could be creative. I could make something happen. I'm trying to think. Sprint force velocity profiling. Again, it's one of those things that people talk about, but it's like how many people actually talk about the process. The only stuff I've actually seen is like Cam Joss. So I don't know if this will probably be a public podcast, not like a private Patreon video, but like, well, let's have every number it spits out. Let's define what it is qualitatively. Let's look at the formula of what each of these numbers are. So it's like, for example, like max power divided by kg is like force times velo divided by 4 divided by body weight. Well, it's like force zero or F0 is in that formula. So shocker, it's super highly correlated with force zero, Pmax and force zero. So it's like probably just pick one. So going through straight up, just what are these numbers? What are the correlations between them? And then like if we put some at the beginning of the sprint first step, some in acceleration, some in top speed, Well, I can basically turn all 10 sprint force velocity profile metrics into like four. And then it makes it way more easy to make a decision tree out of it, way more easy to talk about it with coaches and things like that. So I guess I'm speaking into existence. That'll be a podcast, a solo podcast episode soon.
That's cool. And yes, I forget the wording of that specific Einstein quote. It's something like something about simple is
Yeah, how
yeah.
well you know something is how well you can explain it.
Oh, okay, that's not the exact one I was going for, but that fits
Oh, as
as
simple
well.
as possible, but not simpler.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah,
or something like everybody wants to say something is simple, but that doesn't mean it's stupid. I'm breaking it down to
something
what
like
I've
that.
internalized
Yeah.
it to be. I know Einstein would probably never use the word stupid, but it pretty much the most impressive thing you can do is make something look simple, and
Mhm.
that doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah.
And to me, boiling that down to four decision points is the definition of that. Because what's the point of spending so much time on all these things that, yeah, they probably matter, but is it that big of a deal to take a high school college athlete and make decisions based on 18, 20 different metrics as opposed to three to four?
Mhm.
You can probably figure out enough off of those three to four. And maybe things change if that individual is training for the Olympics and you need to figure out things that are hyper specific and you have a 4 year timeline to do it.
Mhm. Exactly. And this is growing older and like appreciating more things that I wish I had more time at in like my formal education, but I only took one stats class in grad school. And I remember we were doing multivariable regressions. It's like y equals mx plus b, but it's like a squared plus b, a squared plus b squared plus c is like three, or one's a constant, so two. But basically, he's like, you can't include all of the metrics. So if I have like five force plate metrics plus five Rapsodo metrics plus five, like you can't just make a formula with all 10 of those because then you're just describing what's happening versus using these things to basically predict.
Hmm.
But the phrasing that I came up with is like, are we differentiating or are we describing? So if I report all 10 force velocity profile metrics, I'm just describing their profile versus I'm actually using it to differentiate and a little bit more concise and kind of that next level. Yeah, I'm super excited about that. And it's been a fun challenge. I think similar to you enjoying getting into a podcast, depending on how many solos you've done. My favorite episode, episode 17.
One, only one.
It's crazy how like I'll do a solo and I'm like, I just ranted for 40 minutes about this, but it's like, could I have done this in maybe 25? Or how well you can teach things shows how well that you actually know it. I'll have one more anecdote. My old mentor used to always use this quote because it bugs me so much when I just see these posts on Instagram of people just saying like exercise science and XFIZ buzzwords, rate coding and muscle tendon unit firing and all these things. And it's like they're just saying words just because other people don't know what it is, so they think it's smarter than it is. And Kelly Starrett, one of the big mobility guys, PT, if you know who that is, he was speaking at a conference and he's using words like, oh, and your shoulders kind of gunked up and things like that. And this guy kind of like called him out and was like, hey, like why are you using such casual words? And then he went on this like 10-minute monologue using all the fancy words and the PT words and all these things. And he was like, how is that? And he's like, oh, I actually like the easier words better, you know? And it's like you have to know the fancy stuff so well that you know what's true and not true and worth kind of getting in the nuance and weeds and stuff. So thank you for the compliment, I guess. Maybe if that was a compliment, but I'll probably stop talking now.
No, I think it's perfect. It's a cool route to go down. It really is. It's what our venture was with Flex Pro Grip. Take this crazy, difficult, complex phenomenon and break it down into something simple
Three
that's
muscles.
actionable. Yeah.
Crazy.
People know muscles and they know that we can train them. So if we can figure out all the things you talked about in your training programs, the intensity, the duration, the total exposure, and figure out that in programming, it's simple enough that somebody can follow. So yes, I applaud you for paving the way on your own side in overall athletic performance instead of the one little niche area that we care about.
I mean, you took 300 or 200 studies, and depending on on what valuation you put in like the Tommy John rehab surgery kind of sector? I don't know, let's just say $1 billion probably, or is there an actual number?
Oh, on how much money has gone into TJ surgeries?
Surgeries, PT, rehab, all those things.
Oh my God, yeah, it's got to be well over a billion.
All right, let's just say so you have 200 research studies and you have over $1 billion industry, and elbows get hurt because three muscles are weak and we can train them. But it's because you did the work, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Thanks for hyping us up on the podcast about you. That was very nice of you. Thank you.
Use code Big Toe at checkout.
Yeah. Speaking of Big Toe, I definitely want you to plug yourself again. How can people get in touch with you? I know you said it at the beginning. You are on seemingly every social media, at least the two that I'm on, so it seems like everyone to me.
Fantastic. Well, depending on how much of your audience is on TikTok, no, I'm just kidding. But I am on TikTok, but that's a little different. Twitter and Instagram are probably the more relevant ones. Those are both Coach Big Toe, BIGTOE. I'm on LinkedIn as well. The links to all these things are in my IG and Twitter for my podcast, my YouTube channel, my Patreon, and things like that. Or just directly at my email is fine. Matthew, two T's, dot Tometz, TOMETZ, at gmail.com, or just DM me. I'm on Instagram too much anyway, so probably just shoot me a message on there. But I got a variety of platforms, written, audio, visual. I just enjoy this field. I enjoy being creative. So again, it's like when I got into video editing and I was like learning and reading about all these things, it's like, oh, there's a science to setting up your frame and the exposure and the spacing and all these things, but it's like creative in how you apply it. But then I have this like vision of like a video and then turn it into real life. So I enjoy making content. It's creative, it's relevant to the field, it helps other people out. It's a good reason to connect. So I have plenty of that out there, but basically just hit me up on IG.
There we go. Yeah, long story short, the dude's on socials. Find him.
So when you called me concise, I was like, oh, I've never been called concise before.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Big Toe. Appreciate you coming on. Matt, it's been a pleasure. And to all the listeners out there, thanks for laying back with us.